When I was 12, my mom worked long shifts at the airport 7 days a week, so my younger sister, who was 10, and I were often home alone. For context, our house had gates on the windows and a gated door that we had to unlock before we could get to the actual front door. One night, around 10 p.m., we were watching TV and getting ready for bed when I started hearing strange noises coming from the front door. I soon realized it was someone banging on the gate. Back then, I was a bit naive and decided to open the door to see who it was. Standing there was a young white man, probably in his late 20s, wearing a black and white striped shirt and a jean jacket. I asked him what he needed, and he stared at me blankly, calmly saying he needed me to let him in. I asked him why, and he repeated his request, saying, "Let me in." I'm in trouble, while looking over his shoulder. His behavior made me feel uneasy, so I decided not to unlock the gate. Just as I made that decision, the police arrived and pulled guns on the man. They ordered him to walk backward with his hands up, and that's when I quickly shut the door. In that moment, I realized he might have been fleeing from the police after committing a crime. To this day, I can't help but wonder what might have happened if I had opened the door. It's something I try not to think about too much. A few years ago, I woke up one Sunday morning to a phone call. It was a little girl, maybe about 4 years old, who cheerfully said, "Morning, Granddad." I chuckled, thinking she was sweet, but I gently explained that she dialed the wrong number. She just said, "Oh," before hanging up. A few minutes later, the phone rings again. "Morning, Granddad." I laughed again and told her, apologetically, that she dialed the wrong number once more. Then she said, "Are you coming, Granddad?" "What time are you coming?" "Hurry up, we're about to get started." She sounded so excited, like there was a birthday party or something fun happening. Still laughing, I tried to explain that I wasn't her granddad and said goodbye before hanging up. I lay there for a moment, still chuckling, but then the phone rang again. "Morning, Granddad." By the third time, I was a little more firm in saying, "I'm not your granddad." But then she replied, "You are my granddad, silly," with a playful tone, as if she thought I was just playing a trick on her. It was so bizarre but funny at the same time. I tried again to explain that I wasn't her granddad, but this time she dropped the phone and ran off. In the background, I could hear her telling someone, "Dad, Granddad is playing tricks on me. He won't talk to me." She sounded a bit upset. Then a man picked up the phone. "Dad, is everything okay?" he asked. I, still thinking this was all funny, explained that his daughter had just dialed the wrong number several times and it was all a misunderstanding. But then his tone shifted, and he said, "Okay, Dad. Are you at home? Stay where you are. We're on our way over." Now, he thought I was his dad. I wasn't laughing anymore. I explained again that I wasn't who he thought I was, that it was just a wrong number. But then what he said made my stomach drop. He said my name and then, in a worried voice, "I'm really worried now, but we'll be over in 15 minutes. Don't move." That really freaked me out, so I quickly hung up the phone and lay there in bed, trying to make sense of it all. They never called back, and I just assumed it had been some kind of prank. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Over the next few days, I asked everyone I knew if they had been behind the prank, but everyone swore up and down that it wasn't them. It wasn't just that the girl thought I was her granddad, but the man on the other end had also thought I was his dad and even said my actual first name. It seemed like too many strange coincidences for it to be random. Still puzzled, I decided to call the number back a few days later just to see who would answer. But when I dialed, the number was no longer in use, and all I got was a dead tone. That really sent a chill down my spine. Who knows? Maybe I was called by a grandchild from a parallel universe or something. And judging by how happy and carefree she sounded, I guess the parallel version of me was a pretty lucky guy. If you're enjoying the stories so far, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Last night, my husband woke me up around 11:50 to tell me someone had been knocking on our door and ringing our apartment's doorbell for about 10 minutes straight. He woke me up so I could possibly identify the person. When I looked out of our upstairs window, I saw a man walking toward his car in the apartment parking lot, which is across the street from our unit. He was wearing blue jeans and a gray t-shirt. He was of medium build, maybe around 30 years old, with blonde hair. He wasn't hiding his face or anything, but what stood out was that he was carrying something that looked like resistance bands or rope. He sat in his car for about 3 minutes while I was on the phone with dispatch, then returned to our door and knocked for another few minutes. After dispatch informed me that the police were on their way, they hung up. At that point, I started recording the car, reading out the tag number, make, and model while watching him park and reverse the car repeatedly. Out of nowhere, he backed out of the parking lot and sped off, but not before the officer arrived and pulled him over. My downstairs neighbor then knocked on my door to tell me that he had been peering into her children's window and banging on her door as well. She told me her husband had just left only a minute before the man started knocking on her door. She mentioned that he must have seen her children through the window, which is likely why he kept knocking. Since our doors are right next to each other, he probably couldn't figure out which door he wanted opened. He was also watching us through our upstairs windows, so I quickly turned off all the lights and closed the blinds while I called dispatch. The police never followed up with us for a statement. I've reached out to dispatch to get an update and am waiting to hear if any action was taken. We're staying vigilant to see if he's been following us or anything. I'm replacing my porch light bulbs with motion detectors and adding bars to the windows and door tracks for extra security. My neighbor and our families are feeling pretty panicked because he was outside for about 25 to 30 minutes, which shows a lot of determination to get inside, right? I'm still waiting on a call from the responding officer. I have his badge number and name, so if I don't hear from them today or tonight, I believe he might be on the third shift. I'll call the substation. If they didn't take any action, I'll file a suspicious person case to have it on record. We've had no other odd encounters at night. While reviewing the video I took, I suddenly remembered that car. A week ago, around 8 p.m., I was walking my dog to let him pee, and I noticed the car driving very slowly through the parking lot. It parked a few spots down from where I was standing with my dog. The car just sat there with the engine running, and as soon as I heard it, my ears started ringing, and I got this horrible feeling. It was so intense that I ended up just turning around and going back home, not even letting my dog finish peeing. I made sure to shut all the doors and windows. I believe this man has been stalking our apartment building for some time now, possibly watching me and my neighbors. I have a feeling he was targeting those children and trying to find a way in. Let me start by saying that before this series of events, I was 100% a skeptic when it came to anything paranormal. Even now, I'm still in shock over what I witnessed yesterday, but I'll recount everything from the beginning. About a month ago, strange noises started in my apartment building. It sounded like someone was doing construction work in their unit, hammering, banging, that sort of thing. At first, I didn't pay much attention to it. It's not uncommon for people to repair things in their homes. The noises began on a Friday, usually in the afternoon, and carried on until around 2 or 3 a.m. The same thing happened over the weekend. Mornings were quiet, but the rest of the day was filled with constant banging, as if someone were working non-stop. It started to annoy everyone living on the right side of the building, including me, especially since the noise made it hard for people to rest before work. We decided to track down the source of the noise and figure out which apartment it was coming from. There's also another building close to ours, with connected walls, so we considered that it might be coming from there. I personally went to each apartment on our side of the building, pressing my ear to the doors, but the sound was faint everywhere I checked. The unit most affected was directly above mine, where my neighbor lives with her daughter. Naturally, we assumed the apartment above her was the source. However, the unit had been uninhabited for months. The water and electricity were shut off, so no one was supposed to be living there. To be absolutely certain, we contacted the owner and asked them to open the apartment so we could check for any signs of someone sneaking in or forcing entry. When they unlocked it, we found the apartment completely empty. No one was there. Yet, bizarrely, we could still hear the noises. This time, it seemed like they were coming from the unit below my upstairs neighbor's apartment. Now confused, we ruled out the previously suspected uninhabited apartment as the source. Time went on, and the phenomenon continued every single day, without fail. The banging noises would echo through the walls, striking every room and even furniture. Objects would seemingly fall in the bathroom and kitchen. It became a relentless, almost malicious disturbance. The police were called multiple times, but there was nothing they could do. Of course, they couldn't hear or see anything unusual when they arrived. The entire situation has left all of us in the building both frustrated and unnerved. They entered the flat and, interestingly, heard the noises themselves. However, no one could ever pinpoint the exact source. The sound seemed to travel unnaturally fast, from the kitchen to the living room, for example, which made it even stranger. On top of that, in the first floor corridor, we started banging on the wooden walls, and to our shock, we got responses, knocks coming back from this unknown source. Even when we asked questions like knock once for yes, knock twice for no, we would receive replies. If I knocked once, twice, 3 times, or even 4, the same number of knocks would answer back. It was eerie and incredibly unsettling. Fast forward a bit, my upstairs neighbor and her daughter left for the weekend. And, almost magically, the noises stopped. I didn't realize they had gone away until yesterday, but at the time, I just thought, finally, the noise is gone. However, as soon as they returned, the knocking returned too. Yesterday, I was in the corridor chatting with my upstairs neighbor and another neighbor from a different section of the building. Both the neighbor and her daughter were outside the flat. The daughter was playing with another girl and the other neighbor's granddaughter. During this time, there were no noises at all. We were all relaxed, chatting in the corridor. But then, her daughter went back inside to grab a doll, and within 3 to 5 seconds of her going in, the knocking started again. Every single time the daughter went inside, the knocking would start shortly after. It was so consistent that we decided to test it further. I asked my neighbor if I could go inside, and she said, of course. I went in, stood there for about 30 seconds, and heard absolutely nothing. I came back out and asked her if she would go inside. She agreed, and the result was the same, complete silence. Then we asked her daughter to go inside again, and just like clockwork, as soon as she entered, the knocking started. This happened at least 10 to 12 times, and every single time she went inside, the knocking followed. Later on, more neighbors gathered in the corridor, and we repeated the experiment. A different neighbor went inside, silence. The daughter went in, immediate knocking, as loud and chaotic as ever. I can't explain this at all. The police have been called multiple times, and they've heard the noises firsthand. They've searched the flat and surrounding areas, but have never been able to find anything. We've checked the walls, gone to neighboring apartments, and even brought in people to investigate, but no one has any answers. At this point, we're grasping at straws. We've decided to call a medium to come to the building and see if they can figure out what's going on. I don't know how it'll turn out, but I'll be sure to update you all. After witnessing all this, I'm 100% convinced this is something beyond explanation, something out of this world. It finally started raining here, so I decided to take my 14-month-old on a mushroom hunting trip over the weekend. We got a late start, and with the sun setting earlier, we planned to take a quick trail to the river and back, hoping to find something before it got dark. However, we ended up taking a wrong turn, which led us through a large field. The trail looped back to the main path leading to the river, so we decided to keep going. As we walked, the last group of people left the area, and suddenly, it was just me and my little one. As we approached the main trail, a man appeared from a side path cutting through the thicket. He was an odd sight. He had a dog by his side, and as we got closer, he started waving at us in this strange, slow-motion kind of way. It immediately set me on edge, giving me goosebumps, but I didn't want to appear rude. So I gave a hesitant, half-hearted wave back while telling my son to slow down, hoping to avoid crossing paths with this man at the trail junction. After what felt like a long minute, the man turned and began walking down the trail toward the main path. I stayed cautious, not wanting to rush and risk getting too close. We stopped to examine some plants, which gave him time to put some distance between us. I watched as he continued down the trail, which curved to the right and led about 2 blocks to the junction. At this point, I couldn't shake the feeling that if this was going to turn into something creepy, the man would be waiting for us at the junction. Sure enough, when we got there, he was standing off to the left, near the path to the parking lot. To the right was the trail leading 0.6 miles to the river. He was just standing there, completely still, staring at us. My son and I both thought the same thing. What the heck is this guy doing? We decided to keep to the far right, giving him a wide berth. As we approached, I took in more of his appearance: greasy hair, tiny round glasses, a blue windbreaker, plaid long shorts. He looked to be around 50 years old. His dog, a small beagle mix, stood alert by his side. I called out, asking if he was okay, but he didn't respond. He just kept staring at us with this blank, emotionless expression. His lack of reaction and the eerie way he kept watching us made the whole situation even more unsettling. We turned onto the trail toward the river, walking about a block before I pulled out my phone. I angled the camera toward me so I could discreetly watch him over my shoulder. The only movement I saw was him slowly turning his body to keep us in his line of sight. The whole encounter was deeply unnerving. His stare had this predatory vibe to it, amplified by his zombie-like wave, emotionless face, and the way he refused to speak. Thankfully, when we returned from the river, he was no longer standing at the junction or on the main trail. Even so, the experience left me rattled. Something about that man screamed bad intentions, and I'm just glad nothing more came of it. This happened a long time ago, when I was maybe 9 to 11 years old. I'm 17 now. My best friend Katie and I were hanging out at the park near our elementary school. We spent a lot of time there because we both lived just on opposite sides of it, making it super convenient. Our city is pretty dangerous, known for high rates of robbery, sexual assault, and even human trafficking, all due to a major highway running through it. So one day, we rode our bikes to our usual spot, a picnic table that faces across the street at a church. The spot has a clear view of the street, and there are no obstructions, so we can see everything around us clearly. We were sitting on top of the table, talking about random kid stuff when suddenly I got this weird feeling. I looked up, and what I saw completely froze me. Across the street, there was a grown man wrestling with a small child outside of his car. The back door of the car was open. I'm not sure if the child had been walking alone or if the car just pulled up, but I didn't catch that part. Katie and I were just staring, horrified, completely silent, watching this man pick the child up and throw them into the back of the car. It happened so quickly, like 30 seconds, maybe a minute, and then the man ran around to the driver's side and sped off. What I can't figure out is why I didn't hear the child make a sound. We were close enough that we should have, but maybe we were too far away for the noise to reach us. The other thing that's strange is that the child was wearing a huge neon orange construction jacket, so big that it made me question if it was really a child. If it wasn't a child, then why would this man throw them into the car with so much force? The way he lifted them made it seem like they were heavier than just a jacket. After that, we just sat there in shock, not saying a word. We ended up riding our bikes to Katie's house, but the whole thing stuck with me. Even now, I think about it all the time. Katie and I haven't talked about it in years, and I'm not even sure if she remembers. But it haunts me. Was I a witness to a kidnapping? Was it a parent abusing their child? Or maybe it was something that looked sinister but wasn't? I still can't say for sure. But deep down, I feel like it was a child being kidnapped. When I was a senior in college a few years ago, I lived in an old house about a 5-minute walk from campus with 5 of my girlfriends. It was during the COVID period, so we spent a lot of time in the house since there weren't many places to go. To set this scene, this house was quite old, and many of the windows didn't lock. Our landlords, like many college landlords, weren't very responsive and didn't fix the issue. But with 6 of us living there, plus boyfriends visiting occasionally, it felt fairly safe, and we often kept the windows open anyway. Our college was in a town just outside of the second most dangerous city in the state, but around campus, it felt relatively safe. As spring rolled around and the weather got warmer, we started sitting out on the roof to sunbathe. The roof faced the street, and we would get up there by using the window in our roommate Mary's bedroom, which led directly to the roof. Our street was residential and didn't have much traffic, though we did occasionally get catcalls from younger guys driving by. It never seemed threatening. We were just college students enjoying the sun. One night, later in the semester, Mary went up to her room to call her brother while the rest of us were downstairs. Suddenly, she rushed downstairs, saying she had seen a ladder leaning against the roof, right near her open window. After telling us, Mary mentioned out loud to her brother what she had seen, and that's when the situation got strange. My other roommate and her boyfriend ran outside to check and saw a man running away from the house with the ladder. We assumed he had heard Mary mention seeing the ladder and realized he had been caught. It was dark, so they couldn't make out anything about him. I immediately texted our landlord to see if he had sent someone to do work on the house, but he said no. We called the police, who came and investigated, patrolling our house for a couple of nights. We never found out who the man was, what his intentions were, or if he had been there before. It was a strange and unsettling experience. Every summer, my family and a few close friends would travel from Southern California to Bridgeport, a small town near the CNB border in the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains. If you've been there, you'd know it's an incredible place. There's a big biker culture, excellent outdoor camping and hiking in Yosemite High Country, rich wildlife, and fascinating history with native tribes and the gold rush. Bodie Ghost Town is nearby, and my personal favorite, world-class trout fishing. Mark Twain even stayed there at one point, which I always thought was pretty cool. The town itself is small, with a typical Main Street USA vibe, just around 20 buildings. It's surrounded by rivers, lush meadows with cattle and horse ranches, and stunning snow-capped mountains. We would often camp near Twin Lakes, about 10 miles outside of town, but we always made a point to head into town at least once for pizza and beer at a bar called Reno's. One night, after dinner, we were on our way back to camp at twilight. The sky was still light enough to see the peaks in the distance, but it was getting dark, and billions of stars were shining brightly. The road back to camp zigzagged through square-cut ranch properties. It was a narrow 2-lane road, edged by barbed wire fences and an irrigation channel, with almost no streetlights, just one near the Dude Ranch. So, we were driving back, using our headlights, keeping an eye out for deer. When we finally pulled into camp, my mom immediately asked, "Did you see that kid in the swimsuit on the side of the road?" Surprised and a little amused, I asked her where. She described a shirtless kid walking along the road near the cows. I had been driving right behind her and my dad, so there's no way I could have missed it if someone had been there. None of us saw him, and my dad said he didn't see anyone either, which wasn't shocking, honestly. But what was odd was that my mom, who often experiences strange paranormal events, swore she saw him. For some reason, it always seemed like these strange things followed her. She was absolutely serious about what she saw, even describing the color of his shorts, his hairstyle, and how he was walking in the same direction we were, which meant she couldn't see his face, but he looked to be in his 20s. We jokingly tossed around the idea that maybe it was a ghost, considering it was dark and late, and no one else had seen him. Even in summer, the Sierra's high elevation and unpredictable weather can easily turn dangerous for someone unprepared for the cold, especially if they're shirtless in swim trunks. On clear August nights, I've woken up to temperatures in the teens, and where she described seeing him was in the middle of nowhere, just wide fields. It takes about 20 minutes to drive that stretch at a good speed, let alone walk it in the dark. But I suppose anything is possible. The next morning, we discovered that my idiot friend, the one who got scratched in a previous story, had left the cooler after we all went to bed, and a bear decided to help itself to a buffet. So, we decided to make the best of it and head back into town for supplies, find some new fishing spots, and grab dinner again. On the way back to camp, I was driving ahead of my parents, weaving through the fields when, out of nowhere, a set of bright headlights appeared behind me. Looking back, I could tell it was some kind of lifted truck, possibly a Bronco or something similar, so close that I thought it might ram me at any second. I sped up slightly, but the truck stayed right on my tail. I started to get both annoyed and worried. This was a 2-lane road at night, with plenty of spots to pass safely, yet this truck just kept tailgating me. There was no place to pull over without risking getting stuck in a ditch, so I kept speeding up. But I was growing increasingly concerned, knowing that the hills ahead were full of deer, and this truck wasn't backing off. My wife, then girlfriend, and our friends started to get a little freaked out, imagining it could be some kind of backwoods person tailing us. This continued through the fields until I reached the final turn before the road shifted from meadows to woods. That's when I got an overwhelming gut feeling, almost like a scream in my head telling me to slow down. In that moment, I was certain that it was a do-or-die situation, so I slammed on the brakes, fully expecting the truck to ram us. As I did, we rounded the corner, and sure enough, there was a group of 6 or so deer standing right in the middle of the road. It was a bit of a shock. It's always unsettling when you spot animals in the dark, especially large ones. But then I realized something. I wasn't being blinded by headlights anymore, and we definitely hadn't been hit. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and the lights were gone. No sign of any dust kicked up from a vehicle pulling off the road, no headlights zooming past us in the other lane, no indication of where they could have turned off. And the area around us was completely dark. Then, I saw my parents driving up behind us. All of us were confused, trying to figure out where the vehicle had gone. Once the deer cleared the road, we finished the drive to camp. The adrenaline was still high, and I started venting, ranting about how reckless that person had been, how we could have died, and so on, really letting my frustration out. When we got out of the cars, my mom immediately started giving me the usual parent lecture. I got even more irritated when she called me an idiot for driving like that on such a dangerous road in the dark, telling me how lucky I was that we didn't hit any of the deer and how I needed to be more careful. Well, if that guy hadn't been tailgating me so closely, it wouldn't have been such an issue. I snapped. Her response? What are you talking about? There wasn't anyone behind you. And just like that, the tables turned. Fortunately for me, my wife and friends had witnessed everything with me, and they started backing me up about the truck. I explained how I finally trusted my gut and decided to slow down just in time to avoid hitting the deer, and how the truck had simply vanished afterward. My mom got chills and apologized, but reminded me to be more careful next time. Then she started laughing and mentioned how strange the trip had been overall. I have to give my mom credit, though. She never dismissed our experiences as crazy, which is something I think many parents overlook when their kids go through things they can't explain. It's funny because I'd always heard similar stories from people in rural areas back east or read about ghost trucks and folklore, and I used to think they were ridiculous. But now, after experiencing it firsthand, I can tell you, it's real and it's dangerous. I'd never wish that on anyone. Thankfully, that road hasn't caused us any trouble since, but I do drive it a lot more cautiously these days. I still wonder, though, if the shirtless guy and the truck were somehow connected, but I never figured that out. I guess, in the end, only God knows. My name is Anastasia, and a few days ago, something happened that makes me feel sick whenever I think about it. We moved to an East Coast town about a year ago to be closer to family. In fact, my aunt, my wife, and my cousins live only a 10-minute walk from my house. Our area is pretty spaced out and borderline rural, even though it's only about 15 minutes from the outskirts of a big city. Anyway, I was walking my 2 little dachshunds back home from my aunt's house. My mom doesn't like mom alone all day, so I spent a lot of time at her place, and I was genuinely enjoying myself. It was cold and quiet, yet oddly beautiful that day. Once I got home, I fed my pups and 2 birds, then FaceTimed a friend. While chatting and doing chores, I was being loud and giggly, especially when I took the trash to the cans on the side of my house. After coming back inside, I lay down in bed still talking to my friend when my birds suddenly started calling out at something. Anyone who is on a parrot knows they have specific noises for certain moments. My bird's been in my family for about 76 years and with me my whole life, so I recognized the sound as one of alarm or intrigue. I brushed it off, thinking she was just seeing her reflection in the window, and went back to talking to my friend. I got up to get some water, and with my back turned to the sliding glass door, thankfully locked, my friend suddenly sounded like he had the wind knocked out of him. I was confused, thinking he might have gotten hurt, but then he told me, "Go back to your room now." I initially scoffed, thinking I had to be overreacting, but then I saw it in my camera view. There was a man, his face and hands pressed up against the glass door. He was a middle-aged white guy in a gray pullover and dark pants, with a grin on his face. My friend, always quick in a panic, told me, "Don't look at him. Just go to your room." I was shaking uncontrollably, and in a panic, I blubbered as I decided to lock myself and my dogs in the closet. Meanwhile, my parrot kept going crazy. English isn't my first language, and when I'm shocked, I revert to my native tongue, which my friend doesn't understand. Thankfully, he knew what to do. He told me he'd be over in 10 minutes and had already called the police. I started thinking about running to my mom's room to get the gun, so if the man got into the house, I could at least defend myself. Just as I was debating getting up, I heard tapping on the window. It was slow, deliberate, and unnervingly creepy. Then, my stupid dog started barking. At that point, I was ready to accept whatever happened. I was a teenage girl alone at home, and it felt like I was about to die. But then, I remembered my aunt should be leaving for work at this point. I quickly sent her a text saying there was a man at our place. The tapping stopped, and for a brief moment, I thought it was over. But then, something made my heart drop into my stomach. I had left the front door unlocked when I took out the trash. Things just kept getting worse. I begged my friend to hurry, and thankfully, the tapping returned to the window. All I could do was close my eyes and pray someone would arrive soon. It felt like an eternity, crying to another teenager who was probably breaking every traffic law on his way to me. Never before had I been so relieved to hear a man's voice yelling outside my house at 1 a.m. It was my neighbor, a true godsend. Apparently, his pregnant wife had been feeling nauseous and went out onto their deck. From there, you can see my entire backyard. She had a bad feeling when she saw the unfamiliar man approach my door, so she woke her husband to check it out. Honestly, I thank God every day for that woman because I believe she may have saved me. I let my neighbors into my house, and shortly after, my aunt arrived, packing heat. My friend wasn't far behind her. I went from being home alone to an impromptu house party of concerned people. The police arrived about 10 minutes later, and surprisingly, they didn't take the usual 30 minutes to get to the scene, which was a relief. On a brighter note, my bird wasn't too shaken by the encounter. She went back to eating less than 5 minutes later. My dogs were just as happy to see all the people as I was. Since that night, my friend has been staying over with me. I'm honestly struggling to be home alone now, even though an arrest was actually made. I'm incredibly thankful that my neighbor had such sharp instincts and that my aunt and friend reacted so quickly. This could have ended so much worse, and I'm just grateful for everything that fell into place. This happened around 7 months ago when I was in San Diego for job interviews and stayed at my favorite hotel in Sorrento, Mesa. I'm a 40-year-old guy, fairly big at 6 feet 1 inch, and a former strip club bouncer. On the third night, after spending time with some old friends following my interviews, I got back to the hotel around 2 a.m. with a box of Sonny's donuts. After having a few donuts, drinking, and watching South Park, post-COVID, I decided to go for a smoke before heading to bed, making it roughly 3 a.m. I went downstairs, walked out the front to the smoking area by the fountain, but there was already another couple there. Not wanting to intrude, I decided to walk around the hotel's outdoor areas while I smoked. I walked past the pool, the barbecue area, and the basketball courts, then started heading back toward the side door. As I did, a black sedan pulled up alongside me and stopped. The window rolled down, and a small Asian woman asked if I knew how to get out of the parking lot and back to the street. From where we were when she asked, it was literally a straight line about 150 feet in front of her. I honestly thought she was either drunk or blind. I politely told her, yeah, just keep going straight and turn left at the tree. She then asked if I could get into the car and show her. Now, to be honest, I'm a former strip club bouncer, and this woman looked like a version of Holly Wong from Walmart. There was absolutely no intimidation factor, but for some reason, I immediately felt uneasy. It was right in front of her. She could see the road. On top of that, the windows were tinted way more than they should have been, and I couldn't even tell if anyone else was in the car. I used the fact that I was smoking as an excuse not to get in, but she said she didn't mind and gave me a really creepy smile. I politely declined again and pointed out that the road was literally right there, and I'd be walking back in just a few seconds anyway. But she asked again if I could get in and show her. At this point, it felt like something out of a weird ice cream truck scenario or a strange kid situation. I mean, seriously, how often do decently looking women just pull up and ask you to get into their car at 3 in the morning in a hotel parking lot? Right? And how often does anyone ask a big, bearded guy like me to just hop into their car in these circumstances? Nothing about this felt right. Still, I politely declined as I finished my smoke, and luckily, I was already standing right by the hotel side door when this all started. So, I just went inside. The woman drove off as she rolled up the window and, sure enough, headed right to the exit she had asked me to show her to. I told the front desk about it, and they said they'd keep an eye on things, but honestly, I'm pretty sure nothing ever came of it. It's just one of those situations that makes me really wonder, what the heck did she want me in the car for so badly? I'm no pretty boy, so it had to be some kind of scam. I just can't help but wonder how much danger I was actually in. I don't usually believe in things like this, but I had a strange encounter a while back that I was telling a coworker about, and they were insistent that what I saw was a rake. I didn't know what that was at the time, so I looked it up, and after some research, I have to admit it does resemble what I saw. So, about 2 months ago, I was driving home from work around 1:30 in the morning, taking my usual route down a typically busy side street. But since it was so late, traffic was light, just a Jeep in front of me. As I rounded a bend in the road, I caught a glimpse of something in my peripheral vision to the right, standing by the sidewalk between 2 small trees supported by wires. Initially, I thought it was a large, slender dog, maybe a greyhound or Great Dane, just standing there, barking at traffic. I only saw it as I was passing, but as I got closer, I realized it didn't look like any dog I'd seen. What stood out was its head, humanoid in shape with black eyes, a hunchback, and an unnaturally stretched mouth, almost like it was screaming. At that point, I was going about 45 miles per hour, and it was dark, so I couldn't quite make sense of what I was seeing. My mind was racing. What was that? I thought. I quickly slowed down to take another look, and when I glanced in my rearview mirror, I saw it turn and run toward a wooden fence. That's when I saw just how tall and unnervingly slender it was. Its pale skin looked almost sickly, like it had an anorexic appearance. And the way it moved was off, its legs bent backward, joints inverted. It was at that moment I knew something was terribly wrong. Even the Jeep in front of me slowed down, so I have to assume the driver saw it too, but neither of us stopped since it was so late, and it didn't seem like the right time to pull over. The whole thing left me feeling seriously shaken. The rest of the drive home, I kept checking my mirrors, wondering if I should call a non-emergency line to report what I saw. But I quickly decided against it. What would they think? That I was some kind of idiot? So I just kept quiet. These days, whenever I take that road, I keep an eye out, hoping I won't see it again, but I can't shake the image of how it moved with its backward knees. I've only really talked about it with my coworker, because honestly, I know it sounds ridiculous. But I can't stop wondering what I really saw and if I should be worried about it. I feel torn between wanting to ignore it and just move on with my life or accepting that maybe I did see something out of the ordinary. While I was 14, my family and I were visiting Colorado to see relatives. My little brother, who was 12 at the time, and I found ourselves waiting for our parents to finish shopping at a Sportsman's Warehouse. Tired of walking around, we decided to sit down in the camping chair aisle to pass the time. As we were sitting there, a woman approached us. She looked strung out, like she might have been on some kind of drug. She started asking us strange questions, like where the Colorado River was. Then she said, "Can you show me on the map in the front of the store where the Colorado River is?" At the entrance of the store, there was a map of the United States. She kept insisting we go with her to look at it, saying she needed our help to find the Colorado River. The whole situation felt off, and my brother and I were immediately weirded out. Instead of following her, we decided to go find our parents. As we walked away, the woman didn't stop. She kept following us, persisting with her questions. We finally found our parents and told them what had happened. My mom immediately confronted the woman, yelling at her to leave us alone. But even with my mom's firm reaction, the woman wouldn't back off. We quickly finished checking out and left the store, but as we walked out, things took an even creepier turn. We saw the same woman, along with 3 or 4 men, rushing out of the store toward a van that was parked in a spot hidden from the store's security cameras. 2 of the men had been waiting outside, near the entrance, as if they were part of the plan. That's when the realization hit me. The woman had been trying to lure my little brother to the front of the store so the men could abduct him and take him to the van. My stomach dropped at the thought of what could have happened if we'd followed her. To this day, I'm so grateful we trusted our instincts and didn't go with her. Living on the border of Mexico and Arizona, I'm especially cautious now whenever I go into town. This experience has stayed with me as a stark reminder to always be careful when dealing with strangers. You never know how many people might be working together or what their intentions might be. Even as an adult, it's important to stay alert and trust your gut. I once dated someone who owned a cadaver dog. I had never heard of this before, but it turned out the dog was trained to find dead bodies, which could be useful for rescue teams in wilderness areas. The dog would sniff out bodies of people who might have gotten lost, buried under avalanches, or something similar. After dating for 5 months, my now ex asked if I could house sit and dog sit for 2 weeks while they visited family. I was happy to do it since the dog was amazing. I was warned that sometimes the dog might pick up the scent of a corpse on hikes, and I was given instructions on what to do in case that happened. The first few days were uneventful, but one day, the dog suddenly started dragging me down a trail, and I panicked. I thought, oh no, I'm about to find a dead body. But instead, the dog stopped in front of a stern woman who was just strolling along the trail. The dog kept glancing back and forth between me and the woman. She gave me a brief, dismissive comment about my dog not being well trained and walked off. I had to practically drag the dog away from her. This encounter happened a few more times with the same woman, so I called my ex to mention it. I described the woman to them, but they were completely confused and didn't recognize her at all. Fast forward to my last night of dog sitting. I went to bed, and I had the most horrible nightmare of this woman holding me down in my bed. I woke up to the sound of barking, and the dog was standing next to me on the bed, in its alert position, staring at the bed. After that, I couldn't get any sleep and never got any answers about the woman. Over the years, I've had a few unsettling experiences that I can only describe as supernatural, and I thought I'd share a couple that stand out the most. For the last 12 years, I've worked as a prison officer, though I've recently moved to a new facility. One skill I've developed over the years is the ability to retain and recall details, which is extremely helpful for writing reports and recounting events accurately. The prison I worked at was the oldest still in operation in my state, built in the 1870s. Its design included a massive brick wall surrounding the entire property. Though it had been updated over time, many parts of the facility still looked much as they had when it was first built. When I started, the veteran officers would often mention how the prison was haunted, mainly because of the many deaths that had occurred over the years. Some areas were said to be worse than others, like the old segregation unit, known to some as the Hole, where prison graffiti covered the walls. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, if I didn't experience anything strange myself, I figured it was just a cool story, not something to take seriously. However, about 8 months into my tenure, I had an experience that made me reconsider. One night, I was working overtime on one-on-one, which is a shift where an officer is assigned to monitor a suicidal prisoner closely. This meant staying up all night, checking every 15 minutes to ensure the prisoner was breathing. I had a partner who made his rounds every 28 minutes, so I knew I was staying alert. Around 2 a.m., I had just used my flashlight to check on the prisoner and confirm he was still breathing. As I was marking the check on my clipboard, I caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of my eye. My partner had just passed by 15 minutes earlier, and all the prisoners were supposed to be locked in their cells, so there shouldn't have been any movement in the area. I turned to look and saw someone walking down the unit, but something was off. The figure was wearing a blue uniform with a Breton cap, a shiny black leather belt, and holding a baton. The problem was, these uniforms hadn't been used by my department since the 1950s. The current uniforms were gray and modern, while this one looked distinctly old-fashioned. I watched the figure for about 5 seconds before I shook my head, slapped my face, and tried to clear my thoughts to make sure I wasn't imagining things. When I looked back, there was no one there. That was the first strange occurrence. The next one happened about 2 years later, during a regular shift of mine. The central building of the prison I worked at had 2 floors, but it was open, so you could see the balcony of the upper levels. Anyone leaving the rotunda could be seen from the opposite side, even from the balcony. The doors leading into the wings that branched off from the balcony all had windows, as did most of the rooms directly connected to the rotunda. It was around 9 p.m. when I went to the rotunda with a coworker to complete some paperwork for our sergeant, which was a regular task. As we were opening the barred gate to enter the rotunda, I glanced up and noticed that the lights in the administrative wing appeared to be dimmed through the window of the door. I pointed it out to my coworker, saying that we need to report the light being out. But as we were staring at the window, we both saw something move, and it became clear that this wasn't just a light malfunction. It looked like a shadowy figure, perhaps a shadow person, standing in front of the window. The figure moved to its left and passed through a solid wall into another room, where we saw its silhouette again through the window of that room. We exchanged glances, both of us unsettled, but we decided to just keep going. The third strange experience happened about 3 years into my time as an officer. I was working the third shift in the control center, where I was responsible for managing the cameras and security systems. The prison also had several rifle posts around the perimeter, but only about 3 were used during regular operations. It's important to note that when a phone is left off the hook, it rings through to the control center so we can address the issue. The phone call provides a way to listen in on what might be happening in the area, which is crucial in situations like staff assaults or hostage crises. On this particular night, I was serving as the electronic monitoring officer, handling the cameras and perimeter security. The phone rang, and the caller ID showed it was coming from a post labeled 1 post, which was odd because that post wasn't used. It was too small for a person to fit comfortably inside. Furthermore, there should not have been anyone near it, and for someone to get close to it, they would have triggered at least 2 security alarms, which I was monitoring. I suspected that the perimeter officer, who was known for being a bit of a prankster, might be messing with me, especially since he knew how to avoid triggering the sensors. I answered the phone, and all I heard was static that fluctuated in volume, much like an old TV on a static-filled channel being turned up and down. I hung up the phone and switched the camera to check the post. I could see that no one was inside. Just as I was looking at it, the phone rang again, showing the same 1 post caller ID. This time, my lieutenant picked up the phone, and after a minute, he walked over to me, asking if the perimeter officer was messing around, as he could hear mumbling muffled by static on the other end. I pointed out that the camera was showing an empty post, confirming that no one was there. The lieutenant instructed me to have the perimeter officer check the post, suggesting that an animal might have gotten in and knocked the phone off the hook. The officer took a while to get there, as he had been on the opposite side of the perimeter and had to climb 5 flights of stairs to reach the post. During this time, the phone continued to ring from the 1 post, and I could see him opening the door just as the ringing stopped. The officer entered the post with his flashlight on and reported over the radio that there was no phone inside. My lieutenant responded, insisting that there must be a phone because the Kolsky was coming through. In response, the officer held up a disconnected phone line, visible on the camera, and said it was the only thing in the post. This post hadn't been used since the early 1980s. It was simply too small to be functional. After that, the phone would occasionally ring on the third shift until we upgraded our phone system to an internet-based one, at which point the ringing stopped. About 4 years into my service, I had another unusual experience. I was on my regular shift as the electronic monitoring officer and went on a restroom break, which took me about 100 yards away from my post. While I was in the restroom, I distinctly heard the sound of boots clapping on the tile floor of the hallway outside. As the sound drew closer, I could also hear large, clinking keys on someone's waist. When it seemed like they were right outside the door, I called out, "I'll be out in a minute," but the sound stopped immediately after I spoke. Thinking someone was waiting outside, I hurried to finish washing my hands, not taking more than a couple of minutes. When I opened the door, no one was there. The hallway was long, with 3 entry doors, so I would have heard any doors open or close, and it would have been difficult for anyone to leave the area quietly in such a short time. I returned to my post and asked my sergeant if he had seen anyone enter the wing while I was away. He hadn't, and asked why I was asking. Since my sergeant had mentioned before that he believed in ghosts, having done independent paranormal investigations, I told him about the strange occurrence. His face went slack, and his eyes widened. He told me to go check the video footage. I watched the footage from that hallway, as well as from the area above it and outside the wing, and confirmed that there was no one there during the time in question. There were no distortions or signs of anything unusual. The final experience I'll share for today happened when I had been an officer for about 6 years. I was working my regular shift and watching the medication lines after the diner lines had ended. My sergeant was talking with me when. This wasn't a management-related conversation, but more of a friendly chat while making sure the prisoners weren't passing meds or causing any trouble. The medical hallway I was monitoring was connected to the rotunda on one end and to one of the main housing blocks on the other, specifically near our primary segregation unit. As we were talking, we suddenly heard what sounded like muffled talking coming from a radio. We checked our radios and realized it wasn't any of ours, so we started searching the area. Given the location, an unattended radio would be a security concern. As we continued to search, we discovered that the intercom system speaker for the segregation unit was the source of the noise. This intercom wasn't used frequently, which is why we were surprised to hear it transmitting the sound. The sergeant pointed at it, assuming it was broken. The switch was in the off position, and the activation light was off. I took a closer look and got goosebumps when I made a shocking discovery. I said, "Sarge, how is it doing that when it's not even plugged in?" I held up the unplugged cord leading out of the intercom box, giving it a slight tug to show that it was disconnected. The sergeant's face went pale, and he walked away, repeatedly muttering "nope" under his breath. These intercoms didn't have backup batteries or any power hookups. It was just the cord that had already been shown to be disconnected. Despite this, the strange sounds continued throughout the medication lines. After that, I left the area and never heard the intercom act up again. So, that's everything I've personally experienced. If anyone's interested in hearing more of the other stories I've heard from the facility, let me know, and I'll be happy to share more. Thanks for listening. And for anyone thinking of taking on a job like this, don't let stories like these deter you. It's truly a fulfilling career. Thanks for watching. If these stories kept you on edge, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next chilling tale. See you in the next video.